AI-generated code and agentic development are going to change open source. It's definitely going to change which projects get the most adoption, which projects move fastest, how projects get maintained, how projects get consumed by companies. There's a lot of work to review and keep quality standards up and make sure the project is moving in the right direction. And if anyone now with a Claude subscription can grab your repository and spend 30 seconds sending you a 100,000 line diff to review, it changes how much time you have.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boardroom Club today to another episode. So today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Dan Lorenc, co-founder and CEO of Chainguard, a company revolutionizing open source software security by helping organizations build and deploy trusted, secure software. Chainguard raised almost $900 million at a $3.5 billion valuation. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
The pleasure is all ours. So Dan, I want to start with a general question about open source, if you may. So you once described open source as sort of like a chaotic system environment that somehow works despite having no clear economic explanation behind it. Do you think AI-generated code and maybe autonomous agents could destabilize this fragile environment even further, or not necessarily?
So open source is, it's free software published on the internet by random people for any reason. And the one real rule about open source software is that anyone is allowed to use it for any purpose. And people share this code for no economic benefit. Sometimes they do share it for an economic benefit. Sometimes they share it because they had a crazy idea for a project last weekend and wanted to try it and share it with others. Other times they do it because they want to sell support contracts or something like that after. There's no single reason open source happens. There's a whole bunch of reasons companies use it and rely on it on the intake and consumption side. First of all, because it's free. Yeah, that's a great reason to use something. But it's not really fragile. I wouldn't really explain open source as fragile because there are so many different parties from so many different parts of the world doing it for so many different reasons. It's definitely chaotic. But in spite of that, it continues to thrive no matter really what is happening to it. It's kind of like the internet itself. It routes around failure or routes around things that don't work. And so I do think AI and AI-generated code and agentic development are going to change open source. It's definitely going to change which projects get the most adoption, which projects move fastest, how projects get maintained, how projects get consumed by companies. But I can't see it really destabilizing open source as a whole. I think some parts of it will get less important, some parts of it will get more important. But I don't really see it kind of completely changing the calculus on whether people are publishing code or how organizations are using it.
I agree. It's very interesting indeed. And a follow-up going to be about people need to vet what getting included in the final code, right? So I guess now that machines write most of the code, and maybe this is sort of like a dystopic questions a bit. Do you see a future where agents themselves decide what get included at the end of the day inside the software, where humans sort of like no human in the loop?
We see all sorts of experiments and different strategies and different tactics happening right now. And it's one of the great parts of open source. There's no single rule set. And we see people trying all of this. We see some projects just banning AI contributions. We see some projects banning drive-by AI contributions where, if you're a maintainer of a project, there's a lot of work to review and keep quality standards up and make sure the project is moving in the right direction. And if anyone now with a Claude subscription can grab your repository and spend 30 seconds sending you a 100,000 line diff to review, it changes how much time you have. And we see a lot of projects like Mitchell Hashimoto that has famously banned drive-by AI contributions from people that aren't already maintainers. But trusted people that are maintainers are free to use whatever tools they want. The Linux kernel itself, one of the largest and most active open source projects, has a pretty good AI policy in place now that they published, where they just ask people to add a little bit of metadata to every pull request or every diff saying how it was generated. And they're tracking stats to see what works and share the best frameworks and the best harnesses and the best skills with everyone else so they can all kind of lift themselves up. But yeah, at scale, we also see some major projects using AI and letting agents merge the code. There's more code than people can actually review in a lot of these cases. So agents and AI are a great tool to help people do that. The Bun project. Bun is a JavaScript runtime, kind of like a clone, ground-up rewrite of Node.js. And it was written over many years by hand in the Zig programming language. The maintainer of Bun, just a couple of weeks ago, decided to fix some bugs. He wanted to experiment by reporting it to Rust, a different programming language that had some different features around garbage collection. This is hundreds of thousands or even millions of lines of code that have been built up over years. And he first built a test harness that would, ensure bug for bug, feature for feature compatibility. And then in 6 days, Claude gave him a fully working rewrite that passed all tests in Rust. So it started off as an experiment, then quickly got merged. There's no way anybody actually reviewed all of that code, but that test harness was good enough that it didn't matter at the end of the day. And now they're going to clean up the code and rewriting it and refactoring parts of it. Well, they're still sure that the tests are passing and that nothing is breaking as a result. So yeah, it's going to be a crazy time as people experiment with all these different tactics.
Specifically now when you're writing code so fast, I mean, I'm not so sure you could really vet everything, what's getting included in the final version of the software. And you also mentioned that open source isn't broken, but the way maybe we consume it is, let's say, not ideal, to say the least. What did you actually mean by that? Are we supposed to use open source maybe in a different manner, or?
Yeah, there are a couple challenges with, the distribution and consumption side of open source, right? Like I said before, yeah, open source is great. It's anti-fragile. It's going to route around all of these issues, and it's going to be around long after most other software disappears. But people don't really consume open source in source form. And that's one of the big, I think, gaps that not a lot of people realize from the outside. Yeah, open source means the source is available. You can look at it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can fork it. You can make changes to it. And that's how open source used to be developed almost exclusively. And that's how open source used to be used almost exclusively. If you wanted to get Linux up and running, you grab the source code from the mailing list and build it yourself for your system. And that's really hard to do. And not everyone knows how to do that. So to make it easier, people started distributing pre-built versions of a lot of open source. In the Linux kernel, those are those CDs you go and grab, or those live disks or something like that to get it up and running without having to build it yourself. That same thing is true across most programming language ecosystems and all of those other places. You don't build a Java library from source and run it from .java files. You grab jars from Maven Central. For Python, you grab wheels from PyPI. For Node.js, you grab and run, they're called pacuments from NPM. And that disconnect in the source that you might have looked at, you might have reviewed, you might have approved, over to the actual artifact that you're running has been a huge security liability for a while. There's no guarantee that what you grabbed in that binary form has any relationship to the source. There's no guarantee it even came from those maintainers. And over the last couple of years, attackers have started taking advantage of this and slipping malware into those systems and other places. The disconnect between those two systems as well has also led to a lot of challenges for organizations that need to update things quickly or need to patch vulnerabilities. And as the pace of vulnerability discovery and disclosure increases because of AI, all of those links in that supply chain, the time it takes to go from that merged PR to fix an issue to it actually making its way through the full complete dependency stack over into your application could be days, weeks, or months. There's no SLA for any of this. No one owes you anything. It's open source. It's there for free. So kind of all of these challenges compounding into one has put the industry in a pretty tough spot.
Open source is great, but you do need a great security around it because you don't want to mess it up, right?
We have to say it's free as in beer, not free as in pup, or it's free as in puppy, not free as in beer, right? It might be free when you first get it, but it takes a lot of care and feeding.
This is where Chainguard comes, right? Because an interesting thing about you guys that you started actually sort of like a consulting and services revenue streams before the product got fully crystallized to what we see now as Chainguard. But what did this early customers conversation teach you that fundamentally changed all of the roadmap of the company in the long run?
Yeah, when we started, we didn't really have a clear idea. We knew a lot of problems were around in this space, but we didn't really know how we were going to solve them specifically. So we spent some time, trying to work with customers, spend time with customers, see what problems they were really facing, and then see how we could solve them. Kind of not always an easy part of the problem there. And so we did that. And through that time, we discovered, a bunch of ways that we could really help people, that we could really help our customers. And yeah, this open source one is a big one that we discovered. Vertically integrating the open source supply chain and kind of building everything from source and doing it in a trusted way where we can patch all of the known vulnerabilities at the same time without folks having to worry about malware is kind of the only way we could think of to solve this problem. And so that's how we did it.
Now we've seen a strong adoption of the Chainguard based image, right? So do you think the industry is moving toward sort of like a standardized than operating systems for containers, or will companies always prefer bespoke loaded environments?
Yeah, I think containers have dramatically changed the way that people consume Linux distributions, right? Containers aren't new. They've been around for a very long time. But if you look back at what it was like before containers, everyone had one kind of system that they booted up on a machine. And if you wanted to make changes to it, there was a central team that you would file tickets with that would let you, install whatever packages you actually needed for your use case. That disappeared with containers. Every container gets to bring its own tools, whatever you want inside that container environment. And so it kind of led to an explosion of Linux distros in a lot of ways. If you're grabbing a pre-built container from Docker Hub, you don't really know or care what Linux distribution is inside of that in many ways. And so containers kind of gave people a lot of flexibility that they didn't necessarily have before. But with that come a lot of problems potentially. Now, instead of managing one Linux distro that integrates with all of your tooling, you could be managing a dozen of them that all have different package managers and different metadata formats. I don't think the industry is ever really going to pick one and have the whole world standardize on it. But I do think there's a lot of reason that people might want to centralize or pick specific purpose ones for specific purposes.
I know that Chainguard has a lot of success with the federal space, DoD, right? But do you think they're finally reaching the same level of, I would say, regulatory pressure to get the security at the right way, or they are still lagging behind and just keep using the open source, sort of like, let's deal with it afterwards?
Yeah, no, I think the federal government realizes how widespread open source is. And I think they also realize it could pose a systemic risk in a lot of ways to specific industries. And it's not a risk that open source is bad or anything like that. I think the real risk here that people face with open source is more the concentration risk. Yes, there are millions of projects on GitHub and millions of packages on NPM. But for better or worse, a lot of the industry is centralized on a few of those, right? The good ones for each specific use case. And that's where a lot of the risk that I see with open source comes in. If one of these projects falls, it's, a one domino that could trigger a whole industry that's kind of built up and really focused on just that one specific project. And I think that's the aspect that really the government is kind of worried about now and industry is pretty worried about now.
Okay, and we just heard about Mythos, right?
Yeah.
Mythos of Anthropic. I mean, it seems fascinating, but I'm not part of the industry, so I'm not quite sure if it was sort of like a marketing move to say, hey, we got a foundational model that could basically break everything, or is it really good as they say? So do you think in terms of the open source side, was it like a marketing move, or was it really something that could change all the million or billion lines of code as part of the open source community?
Yeah, it definitely not a marketing stunt. It finds real vulnerabilities, real exploits across all code, whether it's first-party code or third-party code. It's real, and it's pretty dangerous in a lot of ways, because it can take something that used to be only a few people in the world had the expertise to really exploit, down to something anyone with a subscription or access to this model could exploit. It's not like little one-line issues or one-line bugs that lead to exploit. It's like really complicated chains of things that, when put together, can turn into something pretty dangerous. And I think at scale, that's where the industry is going to have to figure out a plan for. I think at scale, that's difficult.
I agree. And so we spoke about Mythos, and a great segue going to be about agent-to-agent attacks, right? Because you just launched the Chainguard Agent Skills, and you're treating AI agents sort of like a new class of third-party dependency. But why is the risk greater than, I would say, like traditional NPM dependency? And are we maybe underestimating the agent-to-agent attacks? So
I think agent skills are, one of like the 5th or 6th different paradigms people have come up with for sharing, agent knowledge and things across the board with each other. They're pretty cool. They work really well. They're super easy to write, and they're super easy to share. I don't think the risk is terribly different from something like NPM. It's basically the same thing at the end of the day. You're grabbing code from someone else, but now code is English and it's Markdown instead of a real computer programming language. But I think the area where agent skills get a little bit different is now they've made it so easy to write code that pretty much everyone is a developer and anyone can write an agent skill. And software engineering isn't perfect. Software engineers have a lot of problems and a lot of security issues and everything. But software engineering does have a culture of guardrails, right? We have this culture of code review. We have a culture of scanning. We have a lot of SaaS tools and other security tools and guardrails that prevent things from making their way into production. The rest of the world doesn't know about that. Everyone else writing code doesn't have unit tests. If there's this amazing agent skill that lets your finance team calculate payroll really quickly, that's awesome. But who has a unit test or end-to-end system in front of their payroll system, right? And if the industry doesn't catch up with the best practices about writing software at the same pace that the software industry did, which wasn't quick, right? This took decades for the software industry to figure this out. Then I think we're going to be in for a world of hurt.
Specifically with all the SaaS apocalypse that we see. So people say, okay, all the SaaS company going down, but if they're going down, people would just vibe code, get a different version of Monday or Wix. But then, okay, but could you really use it with all the security layers that you don't really have it? Or
Exactly. And I think that's the risk that the industry is facing.
You also mentioned actually a very interesting quote earlier, something like free as in a puppy, not free as in a beer, right?
Yes.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception maybe enterprise still have about consuming open source software? Something that not necessarily, let's say, come to mind.
I think, I think the biggest misconception is probably, and it's a weird one because everyone does kind of know this at the end of the day, but I think people don't realize still how widespread and ubiquitous open source has become, right? People know these stats that it's 95% of software, that it's running everywhere. But even with that in mind, it's even more places than you might be thinking once you first heard that stat. It's in your phone, it's in your ATM, it's in an airplane, it's in missile systems. Open source is actually literally everywhere. And people haven't paid close enough attention to where it's going because it's free, right? If you buy a piece of software, like say Windows 7 or something like that, you know exactly where it is because you pay for that license and you track it closely. But open source, when it's free, it's running on way more systems and way more versions of it than people realize. And the inventory management, I think, is probably the biggest lacking piece here.
It definitely is, and I hope it won't happen, but I guess only once there's going to be sort of like a ChatGPT moment
Yeah.
that the security will be breached in an unprecedented scale, only then maybe people would understand the security issues involved. And okay, so I want to shift the gear a little bit to the go-to-market and some advice, because you mentioned that innovate on your product, not on your go-to-market motion. I don't know if I said like the full quote, but in today's startup world where it's so easy to build a product, right? You could essentially people try to reinvent everything. What do you think execution fundamentals are maybe undervalued?
Especially for early stage, and a lot of advice varies depending on what stage your company is and stuff like that. But I think especially for early stage, you hear a lot of founders that like want to be stealth and stuff like that. And I think that doesn't make any sense. I think you have to let the world know what you're doing. And it's way harder to get people to pay attention to you than you might realize. And so any chance you have to get attention, any chance you have to let people know what you're doing is important, and don't miss it. These are the things where you can't short circuit it. You can't short circuit awareness. And if you wait too long, then you're going to wish you did it earlier.
You mentioned maybe hiring sales reps earlier. Do you think this is still the case in the AI era, where sort of like the PLG that we see people just buy software so quick rather than the typical account executive? Do you think really enterprises should hire the sales rep as soon as possible, get the world to know your system, or depends?
Well, yeah, it depends. It depends who you're selling to. It depends what your buyer is. It depends what your product is, all of that. There's no single answer here, right? Selling enterprise software is still hand-to-hand combat, right? It still requires sales reps. It still requires contracts to get signed. It still requires legal teams, and that hasn't gotten any easier. But if you're selling to consumers, or if you're selling to smaller companies where self-serve it does fly, then yeah, agents are great at that. People have agents buying software today. Ramp has credit cards you can issue for agents in the procurement system. And so it really varies. And if you haven't even figured out what your go-to-market is, then it's a good time to think through that. Can you get something set up that way where you're not selling to enterprises to get critical adoption? There have been a lot of success stories about this in the last couple of years.
Yes, that's for sure. I think it was a company that reached like $100 million of ARR in 9 months and $200 million of ARR in like 11 months. So it was phenomenal. And we see it even more and more, but then to really scale it to the billion, maybe going to be the big differentiator. And okay, I want to move now to sort of like a rapid fire question.
Sure.
So first question is, you're a founder of a successful company, but what advice would you give to, I would say, like builders in today's world, which is so easy to build, but it could be very complicated to really differentiate yourself, where the barrier to build companies, I mean, someone could just like copy you tomorrow. And
the cost of building software has gone down dramatically. I don't think the full cost of the software lifecycle has gone down at the same pace yet, right? Maintaining software written by agents can still be hard. It still requires an understanding of the system. But yeah, try lots of things. Prototype. That's what's great right now. And this is a world where you can prototype 100 ideas in a month, or before you can maybe prototype 3 ideas in a month, and be very, very, very sure that your idea is going to scale. And you have such a good opportunity for that today with the tooling and everything we have out there. But the full cost and the full total cost of ownership and building a whole company, parts of it are getting faster and faster over time. But depending on what you're selling, and especially if you're selling into the enterprise, trust is still incredibly important. Anybody can tell the difference between a real product with real customers using it in production and one of these vibe coded websites with no names in the about page that was stood up 10 minutes ago by Cloud Code. And that's really what you're selling. You're selling that the company's got to be able to use your product to get a business outcome they want. And that's about a lot more than just the technology.
Do you think, let's say you are a founder now, you're a builder, and you have like 10, maybe 20 engineers, does it make any sense to review their works by the number of tokens that they actually use? I mean, we see all this notion of
Yeah.
tokenmaaxing and, okay, you passed or not passed the token that you should, because maybe then it could be a little bit expensive even in terms of like people just token maxing the.
I don't think anyone knows the answer yet to the right way to build software. And I think it changes weekly and it changes monthly. And I think the really important part of all of this is to be experimenting. These models just in the last 3 months have gotten dramatically better. And if your last experience with Claude was 6 or 7 months ago when it made tons and tons of mistakes and had to be corrected all the time, it's very different. And it's important that people figure out the best way. And it's important that people keep experimenting. I do think a lot of those metrics are good to see if people are doing that. We have tons of engineers, and I talk to a lot of them, and they say, oh, last time I tried Claude, it didn't work. I had to fix everything. And it's like, oh, have you tried it this month? It's much, much, much better this month. And kind of encouraging them to continue that, because the world of software is changing dramatically every day. And unless you're staying up to date, then you're going to fall behind.
Absolutely. So run fast as you can, I would say. And what do you think it means actually to be an AI native company today? Because we see all these companies out there, instead of like .com, it's .ai. We are an AI native company.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean to be an AI native company today?
Yeah, I think for me, it's, when you think of a problem that has to be solved, do you think of hiring someone or do you think of trying to use AI first? And there's no guarantees AI is going to work, but do you try that? And I think that's the biggest thing.
And mentorship. Did you have any big mentor in your life, or maybe even a piece of mentorship advice that you would like to share the audience? Something that maybe we didn't touch before in the advice questions?
The startup world is very friendly. And, if you're in this world and you're building a company, you can just reach out and ask for help. And people are very friendly and they're very responsive and they're going to help you. They might not be able to tell you exactly what to do any given day, but they'll try. And I think that's one of the great parts about being an entrepreneur and building a company and being in this community.
100%. And hobbies outside of work. Do you have any outside hobbies? I know that you have a lot of different hats out there. I like it, but yeah. What are your hobbies?
Not much right now besides running this company.
And coffee, maybe with a different historical figure, or maybe even present one, someone famous, not famous, that you would love to grab a coffee with. Could be entrepreneur, not necessarily, but who would it be?
Oh, man. Well, right now, I've been watching the New York Knicks in the NBA Finals, which is awesome. We have an office in New York City. We've been to a lot of the games. So right now, I'm going to have to say Jalen Brunson on the New York Knicks.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I think they're already like 12-0 from the beginning of the playoff, which is quite phenomenal. And they won like the first game in San Antonio. So, and if you weren't an entrepreneur, sort of like an alternate universe, I don't know, like, well, what would you be? Could be a farmer or something else. So
no, I'd be building something, right? I was an engineer before this and I loved it. And that's what I'd be doing.
Okay. And favorite movie of all time? This is the hardest question of them all, and the last question indeed.
Favorite movie of all time? Oh man, it varies. I'm going to say Ocean's 11. That's always been one of my favorites to watch.
Indeed, I like Ocean 11 as well, much better than like the second and for sure like the third.
Yeah, we
one,
pretend those didn't happen. Yeah, we just pretend those movies never happened.
Yes, I think they're even doing another sequel coming up. I'm not so sure if it's like been finalized, but would be interesting for sure to see it. Maybe it's going to be with open source, who knows, right? And Dan, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a joy. And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other super interesting episodes to show you, from the president of Cisco, COO of Aravi, head of operation at 11 Labs. So stay tuned, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.